Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Jeff Champion, Professional Practice Lead Risk for ISACA. Joining me today to talk about her recently released article, The Future Technology Risk, 4 Ways to Build Stakeholder Trust in Technology, Beth McKinney. Beth, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Same here. Just to give our users some content, can you tell them a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So my name is Beth McKinney. I am a partner in KPMG's technology risk practice. I've been in the technology risk space for over 20 years, and what a journey it's been from when I started to where we are today. Within KPMG, I lead client engagements, but I also lead our technology risk modernization solutions. And we're really focused on and making investments in our COE to help with methodologies, thought leadership, like we'll talk about today, and tools around emerging risk topics like cloud migration, AI, DevSecOps, modern IT delivery. So really looking forward to the conversation today. I think this field of technology risk really has a spotlight on it right now, as organizations try to navigate, the landscape and requirements, and ultimately just protect their technology investments.
Definitely interesting topic.
Mm-hmm.
What would you think the challenges of organization risk functions are facing today?
Gosh, there's so many challenges out there for tech risk functions to navigate. I think there's just so many requirements that are coming at tech risk managers. They have to run kind of the day-to-day, but also manage all the things that are happening in the organization. So whether that be new transformations, acquisitions, new compliance requirements that are popping up, expectations from their external auditors, or one of the things we're really seeing is just an uptick of requirements from your external stakeholders in terms of your customers on what you're doing. So it's, tech risk teams really have to think about their resources and priorities and be flexible and resourced. So that operating model is really important. Asking yourself questions, right? Like, do I have the right operating model and focus on the right priority activities, given you have so much on your plate? And how do you leverage the broader organization to help divide and conquer? Is there things that you can build commonly across the organization? Do you use automation and technology to help enable you? So all of this to try to kind of synthesize the routine work and help to focus on more strategic items. And Jeff, I think another item is tech risk organizations are really challenged to add value back to the business and back to their internal stakeholders, and not just be, a compliance organization or something extra that they have to do. And so to really provide those tools and methods, so at the end of the day, your stakeholders go, gosh, this really helped me. This helped me in my day-to-day job. And to add that kind of value, you need the right skills, right, to keep pace and deliver on that value proposition. So it's no tough ask. And actually, Jeff, if you don't mind, we actually did a webcast this past fall. We had over 600 participants join that webcast live, and I'll share a little bit, if you don't mind, some of the challenges that were highlighted by those 600 participants. The top 2 challenges were cybersecurity risks, which I think we can all agree on. But also the second top challenge was around managing risks around modern architecture. So as the organizations are beginning to modernize their technology, move to the cloud, deploy new processes and methods, how does the risk function adapt to those changes? So just a few things to highlight there from our webcast.
Definitely some interesting topics.
Mm-hmm.
I was intrigued by when you talked about earning stakeholder trust.
Yeah.
And so that's always a challenge. How would that be an active part of a setting of a strategy?
One of the things that we're talking a lot about at KPMG, and clients are coming to us, is around what we're calling digital trust, and the bar is raising. Customers expect that your organization is managing and protecting their data, that you're protecting their services, that you've dedicated meaningful time to that. And so this growing pressure is leading to new laws. It's leading to additional requirements that, whether that be a questionnaire or an audit, by your customer, a lot of effort, right, to respond to that. I mean, I'll give you an example. In Europe now, you have to actually, if you launch a new vehicle, right, a vehicle has lots of software, lots of technology. When you launch that new vehicle model in Europe, it has to go through an audit by the government. That's a brand new, law that came out. And so if you think about that, it's like these external pressures are driving, regulation like that, right? And so when you think about the strategies, some of the ways that some mechanisms that organizations are using is they're actively seeking out things like ISO 27001 certification, SOC reports, and even as far as establishing trust centers. So it's interesting, if you go out and you kind of look at some of the leaders in the tech space, they'll have what they call these like trust centers or trust portals, so that they can actually share this transparency with their external stakeholders, an ecosystem of their controls, results of their DR results, transparency that maybe a few years ago we would have never even imagined. How are organizations kind of building that into their journey? And what is their journey for building digital trust look like? And it even goes beyond, Jeff, like the traditional organizations that we've seen in the past. I had a chief procurement officer for a manufacturing company give me a call and said, "Hey, Beth, like in the last month, I've had 3 suppliers not be able to ship products because of some type of technology or cyber event," right? And so more individuals want to know how you're protecting their services, their data, how you work with them. So just a little bit more on that. That's a really hot topic that we're seeing.
With that being said, what would be some of the key challenges that you're facing? I know I saw some of them, far as when you talked about like a person not being able to ship something out, or being just being stopped from doing things that they need to do, or perform business functions.
Yeah, so I think there's we talked about the challenges, right? But what changes are those challenges maybe driving? I would say there's a few prominent drivers. I would say, one, we've talked about this like increased stakeholder expectations. The second one is this push to transform the organization, to move digital, to streamline and reduce cost. And not only do the tech risk programs have to kind of respond to that change, they also have to look inwards and say, hey, how am I going to transform my risk organization? And then I would say another big driver is data and automation, because the tools have come such a long way. There's such a high potential there to leverage those if organizations, put in the investment. And I think the drivers for this change are different than in the past, maybe because if you think about it, the tech industry footprint is really expanding into all industries, right? I mean, some organizations a few years ago would not consider themselves a tech company that do now. I mean, for example, I have a client that makes axles, and those axles were just a physical thing, right, that they provided. Now with electrification, those have software in them, right? So it totally changes the environment and the risk profile. I have another client that they make rail cars, a hunk of steel, if you will. But now you can lease those rail cars and you can track those rail cars with sensors, right, from a supply chain perspective. So everybody's really, moving towards being a tech company. So it's very interesting. One of the things, Jeff, I'd share with you from our webcast that I found fascinating was 32% of the 600 people who joined the webcast said that they're planning to transform their technology risk function. And an additional 38% said they're already in progress with their transformation. So over 70% were focused on transforming their technology risk function, which was, I mean, I figured it would be high, right? But that was really high. So a lot of people are up to making changes and transforming what they're up to in their organizations, which is great.
Do you believe that's driving the change? Because I could definitely see the change as far as, the way they do things.
Yeah, I do. I think that the fact that there's just so much more technology embedded in everything that organizations are doing, that's really, one of the big drivers. And it's tricky, right? Because one of the other stats that's really interesting is the pace of change is moving so fast, but what about the talent? So one of the things that came out in our webcast was, one of the the top two key things that people were planning to change in their delivery model was around upskilling talent. So 33% believe that they need to upskill their existing talent to keep pace with the change. And another 24% said that they're going to acquire new talent and new skill sets to augment their team. So it's definitely, there's lots of, areas to balance here, because along with this rapid change, you got to have the skills to keep pace with all of that.
Yeah, the challenges with the talent is always tough. You see in the market, there's always a shortage of talent.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel like that's always going to be a challenge for companies.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was just thinking about risk function. What parts of the organization would you consider to be included?
So actually, we're working on kind of for a very big global company, what does good look like from a risk function perspective? And, we're kind of talking about like, what's the core? Well, the core is, enterprise risk, technology risk management, internal audit, compliance, so like regulatory compliance. And then you have all these adjacencies, right? You have third-party risk, you have cyber risk, now you have ESG, that's its whole ecosystem, right? Reg compliance. So all of these organizations, right, are, in this ecosystem or in this world of risk management for an organization. And how do they all work together? How do they all talk the same language? It's no easy task. It's definitely no easy task. But more and more organizations are interested or trying to find those synergies, right, and have a more integrated risk portfolio. But I will say, I haven't seen one that I would say, it's fully integrated, right? It's such a journey and such a task. So
definitely. So earlier when you mentioned digitize
the
organization, what do you mean as far as digitize the organization?
Yeah, so many organizations are, still relying on manual procedures for, performing risk assessments, for doing monitoring. When you're doing things manually, you might only do those on a very rare periodic basis, right? So when you're doing, a once a year review on something and you find something, that risk has probably been there for a while, right? So when we say digitizing, it's like, how do you move the needle and how do you move, more real time to the point of where that risk exists, right? And being able to identify things using data, using technology, to identify any anomalies or risks, closer to the time of the event or it arising. So some examples include automated risk assessments. So we at KPMG have invested a lot of effort into what we call our risk navigator tool, which allows us to take different frameworks. It allows us to quantify risks using financial information, using the different risk appetite information. It also allows us to use external data. So if we're able to get geopolitical data or geographic data, right? How can we use those external data sets to enrich our risk assessment? So risk assessment is definitely one of them. Control monitoring is another place where we're seeing so many organizations are very interested in, moving away from doing kind of sampling to being able to continuously monitor control. So continuous controls monitoring is a very ripe area. And then just in general, just automating your risk processes, whether that be having a GRC tool that allows you to have workflows, that allows you to do certifications, that allows you to do issue management, right? These are just some of those areas where the data, the tools, the technology is there to help streamline and automate the risk processes. And there's a wide maturity that we see across the board. But I would say most organizations are trying, to further digitize, and further mature in that space.
Yeah, it's always a challenge especially when trying to automate a ton of tasks.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely know about that because when I was an engineer, there was so many tasks that I wanted to automate,
Mm-hmm.
and so what I did was as part of the assessment, I kind of looked at um, what would meet the business risk
Mm-hmm.
far as what we want to approach.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that being said, did you use some type of analytics like
Mm-hmm.
to have insights?
Yeah, analytics is definitely another element of digitization for sure. So, and actually, we in our webcast that we did, just as a little data point, 50% of the participants said that they're using data analytics effectively, which means 50% thinks that they're not using data analytics effectively. So, it is really a wide range of maturity out there. And I think that sometimes people just get overwhelmed. It's like, oh my gosh, how do I use analytics? And what I always tell clients and organizations that I interact with is there's practical ways to use data, right? And there's advanced ways, but from a practical perspective, I had a client where, going through the controls, it's like, okay, everything looks great, right? From an access management perspective, it looks like we're following, everything's passing. But as you looked into it deeper with data, and only with data would we have gotten to this. We found that, every quarter when they did a user access review, they were having a spike in, requests for removing access, like all the way up to like 40%. And it's like, well, this is interesting. The control's effective, right? But we're having these like big spikes of access removals. And basically come to find out through, double clicking through the data, we found that these were applications that were self-service. So people could just click, 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 and people were just requesting way too much access because they could, and people were approving it. And so the controls weren't working, right? So that's a practical way of using data to kind of root cause and look at the risk environment in a little bit of a different way. But on the I would say more mature spectrum, organizations are developing continuous monitoring scripts, right, and routines that you can monitor. Using structured data, you can go from looking at something maybe once or twice a year to looking at it real time and identifying something right away. We're definitely seeing that, especially in the application development space. So there's new tools being deployed, in like a GitHub, and how you can look at the configuration of your different development branches. You can use automation for that. When you're developing an application, have you embedded, secrets or passwords embedded in the code that you can easily scan for. Obviously, in the area of identity access management, lots of ways to monitor using data analytics around, user access, activities, SSO removal, and things like that. So there's a lot of data out there that can be used, and it can be overwhelming. But in working with clients, my recommendation is always just start small. Don't get overwhelmed. And pick a few areas that you really think will add value and go for it. So
That makes sense.
yeah.
And so to circle back with all those different things that's going on, Um, why would the transparency be so important from a customer and a stakeholder standpoint, and from a regulation standpoint?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this really goes back to what I was talking about, right? Is that this ecosystem that we work with, that we're working in, people want to know that they can rely on your service, right? Or they can rely that you're going to protect their data. And so that raising of the bar is definitely driving, new regulation, that we're seeing, whether that be in privacy, whether that be with the new SEC cybersecurity ruling that's been proposed that may come through in the short term, where more transparency, right, around your incidents or risk management framework. So the bar is definitely raising, and I think the question that a lot of folks in this risk space are saying is like, how am I going to accomplish all of this, right? If the bar is raising, I need more resources and I need to have a more proactive approach to all of this. So I think making sure that those conversations are being elevated and there's an awareness at the technology leadership or even higher than that, that these new demands are there. And, from a commercial perspective, it can be advantageous. It can be a brand builder, right? If you're ahead of this stuff.
Definitely challenging. Definitely challenging. Anytime it's going to come down to transparency and communication. Um, what are some of the organizations, like, what can they do to accelerate the risk transformation?
Um, yeah, I think from an acceleration perspective, I wish there was a silver bullet, right, or a magic wand, but we know that that doesn't exist. But one area that comes to mind is, and we talked about this a little bit, Jeff, like with the ecosystem of all these risk organizations, is how do you pool together your resources and how do you look for those synergies that if you were to make some changes or make some investments, how could that investment benefit more than just your organization but others? So that might be a way to kind of get more resources, more funding behind what you're trying to accomplish. For example, I had a client who wanted a new GRC solution. And at the same time, I had a separate conversation in the same organization with the ESG team who was also looking for a GRC solution, right? So it's like, hey guys, combine forces, and the business case is just that much more impactful to invest. And yeah, so I think those, trying to find those synergies within the organization will be helpful to help accelerate. But I guess the other thing I would just say is just get going. I find that even internally within KPMG, it's like there's never a perfect time to, launch a new initiative or, transformation. But you got to have a strategy and what your journey is and where you want to go. So just get going, right, and start to chip away at that over time.
Speaking of KPMG, what's the future of the technology of the risk point of view?
Yeah, so Jeff, we're really excited. We're to launch our future of technology risk point of view. I've personally been involved in the process to help develop this and can't wait to share it with the masses. We canvassed all of our client engagements and summarized many of what our clients are coming to us to ask, for our help. And in summary, really, the moral of the paper is the bar for technology risk organizations has been raised, right? And we talk more about that in the POV in detail, but it's a lot about what we've talked about today, right? It's those raising stakeholder expectations. It's the business transformation that's occurring. It's all the new technologies that are, helping to modernize the environments that we have to be responsive to. So and then in addition to that, what we've done is we've highlighted some of our client stories. So examples of how other clients are tackling some of these challenges. And, we find that a lot of times these are probably things that are on everyone's mind, but they're just not really sure how to tackle it or how to get started. So hopefully this POV inspires technology leaders, and also inspires some of our technology risk, leaders' strategies.
Well, Beth, I could probably talk to you this stuff about. I could talk to you this about this all day. I mean, I really enjoy it because, I mean, I've been in situations where I wanted to, get earn stakeholders' trust.
Mm-hmm.
But that's all the time we have left for today.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking time to chat with me. If you want to read Beth's full article, please click in the link below. I'm Jeff Champion, and thank you for tuning in.